You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. My name is Jacob Ambrose Willson, Senior Editor at Criticaleye, and this episode is being recorded at the 2025 CEO Retreat, where leaders are discussing how to inject pace into their organisations to keep up with this very fast-moving operating environment. So, I'm joined by 2 guests to explore this theme of pace. Sangeeta Desai is currently a NED at Canada-based Boat Rocker Media, and has previously held other chair and NED roles in media and entertainment businesses, along with C-suite positions as well, COO and CEO to name 2. And broadly, she navigates complex business challenges from M&A to transformation to exits. Sangeeta is also a Criticaleye board mentor. We also have Criticaleye's own CEO, Matthew Blagg, joining us for this one. Matthew has been helping leaders navigate challenges around strategy, stakeholders, and personal development for over 20 years since founding Criticaleye. So lots to discuss. Let's get straight into it. And Sangeeta, I'll come to you first. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good stuff. And please feel free to expand on the intro I gave. But really, I wanted to ask how chairs and non-execs can best support CEOs given the amount of volatility at present and the pressure that creates.
So I think, I can speak to what's happening in my industry, which is the media and more specifically the content industry. We've had a confluence of events, which I would call the perfect storm. That really started with the disruption that was created by the rise of the streamers, like Netflix and Amazon Prime. But since then, it's been really a litany of other things as well, other extraneous factors, including the rise in interest rates, meaning money became much more expensive and therefore much more expensive for people to compete even in the streaming world and to produce content. As well as the writer strikes and actor strikes in Hollywood, which brought the industry to a standstill for a number of months, and the after effects were felt for even longer. There's the threat and opportunity that's created by AI, and now you have the latest gambit, which is potential tariffs created or put onto the movie and potentially also the television industry. Volatility and uncertainty really have been the name of the game, I would say, for the last 48 months. And if you'd asked me 48 months ago, what do things look like? People would have said, it's going to turn next year. Then the following year, they would have said it's going to turn again next year. And I think what we have to understand in our business is, yes, the market will improve, but it's fundamentally shifted from where it was and what it was, and the business models have changed. And so to go back to your question, I think the chairs and NEDs need to really challenge CEOs and management teams and themselves to think about what the future looks like in this new world. And we don't know exactly what the new world is, but that's what boards need to think through and really help the CEO think through how the business should position itself for that future, rather than sort of waiting for the market to turn as a strategy and making a few cost cuts here or there. I think the shift is more fundamental, and so a much greater rethink is needed of the fundamental business model.
Yeah, and Matthew, could I get your take on the same question? And really, does the role of the non-executive take on added importance in the current moment, especially for less experienced management teams?
First of all, good afternoon, Jacob and Sangeeta. So great to join you. I think the first observation, everything is situational. So in every scenario, it's down to the sort of situation that the organisation's in and the sector that you're in. What we do see consistently, though, the pace has been dialed up. And when I say pace dialed up, probably that pace of sort of change and complexity has dialed up substantially. So the element, first of all, around support for a CEO, I think, is an interesting question for a board. And I think that Sangeeta, the support is probably driven by great challenge. I think great leaders like a board that is challenging, but understands the positive challenge as opposed to ignorant challenge. And I think that is really important, that you understand the landscape that your organisation is in. And if you look at great boards, the non-executives have the competence and capability to challenge the CEO with whether that's technical questions around the space or around geopolitical questions that are coming to the surface. When that breaks down, I think you get the gap between the two becoming greater, and I think things become more complex. But yes, there's no question in a tighter environment, the role of the CEO is accentuated and as such more important.
Yeah, and Sangeeta, there was an interesting debate earlier on this morning around short-termism versus long-termism. So how important is it to be long-term and strategic from the board in this current environment? And also, is that influenced by the ownership structure of the business? Because I know you have experience in PE and listed environments.
Yeah, and I think, look, in both private and public company situations, the short term inevitably supersedes the long term just because of the immediacy of the issues being faced. So it can really take over the board discussion, it can take over the CEO's time, the management team's time, but I think it's really important that boards and CEOs, management teams find the way in their board discussions, in the structure of their boards, to always keep a focus on the longer term strategy. Both setting it and then ensuring that we're executing towards it, because I've seen in many situations that I've been involved in, whether they're private equity owned or public company owned, ultimately what drives value is the longer term strategy. Whether you're exiting or it's your share price, you have to have a bigger strategy in order to get the value. Even though, investors, whether they're private or public, want to see short-term results as well. So it's managing those two things. And oftentimes, you will have to communicate to your external shareholders, stakeholders, that the short-term may be compromised for the long-term. That's easier to do in a private environment than it is in a public environment. But either way, the board needs to support the CEO in finding the way to do that.
Yeah, and Matthew, can I get your view on how the ownership structure impacts pace? Because the thing I hear often is that under PE you can move faster. There isn't maybe the distraction of the quarterly cycle.
A generalisation, you'd argue probably yes, that's the case. I think, but it is generalisation because across private equity you've got a large number of organisations with high debt positions at the moment where it's a pretty difficult environment. In a similar way, being listed if you're not in the right place is pretty grim at the moment. So if you're a top quartile business in either of those two ownership structures, you're in a relatively strong place. If you're a bottom quartile position, it's pretty difficult. I think what you can say is that it's easier running a business when you don't give full guidance at any point. In an environment where the full guidance is choppier, it's obviously an advantage to be off market than on market. And there is a massive difference between putting out statements that then you're marked against to being able to rewrite the story at any point, which is the great advantage in a private business, is that you can rewrite the story as a leadership team and as an owner whereas in a public market, you put your story out and you're marked against it.
I think investors are always demanding, but yes, that certainly when money is tighter and people are feeling pressure across their portfolios, whether they're private or public, there's just more pressure to perform. And I think, the board's role, and often boards will have one of the investors on the board, whether it's public or private, that is a very strong voice. And, that voice can often pass the pressure down to the management team. And I think it's, part of the board's role to ensure that all that pressure just doesn't go to the CEO, and that the board helps the CEO and the team deal with the current environment. Pressure is good, but it has to be targeted the right way.
Yeah, and again, to sort of refer back to some of the debate that was had this morning, talking about misalignment in the boardroom, and Matthew, it was argued that can be a good thing. Sometimes you get into this groupthink mode. So just your view on the importance of being able to maybe have disagreements but arrive at an outcome.
I think disagreement is good. Misalignment is bad, I think, would be my sort of, because they're sort of, you have to have a unification that goes down into the organisation and goes into the external market. But that means you should have very robust discussions in order that you can define what you agree on. I think when you don't have that, I think it cascades through an organisation very far. So I think it's really important that you have the capability to have very robust conversations, but you do align. I think when you get that misalignment, you get side communications, I think that becomes extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and Sangeeta, what's the role of the chair when it comes to handling disagreements and often misalignment?
Well, look, I think picking up on what Matthew said, the chair should ensure that there is disagreement, or certainly that voices are heard from different board members, and that they don't always have to agree. What I have seen on many of the boards that I'm on is this groupthink that you're talking about, whether it's because there's a really strong CEO or a very strong controlling shareholder on the board, or potentially board members that don't know the industry that well. There can be a real tendency to not question a path or a recommendation from the CEO or from the controlling shareholder. And it's very important as the chair to create the space in that boardroom for everyone to express their point of view, but then to coalesce around a strategy and consensus around a strategy, and get buy-in from all of the board around the strategy. But the way to do that is really to make sure that everyone is heard and concerns are addressed and questions answered.
Yeah, and that's the case even more so in a PE board structure, in terms of the chair being that kind of middle ground, bringing the board and the investors together.
Yes, I think the chair role in particular in PE situations is very important, also to preserve that relationship between the PE and the CEO. So the chair can, be very involved in emotive subjects like compensation, or deliver tough messages from PE to the CEO, or help the CEO communicate messages to PE. It's really a critical role in that PE situation.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Matthew, we talk a lot about pace. I mean, it's a big theme of this retreat. What do you think that means for the type of leadership teams and boards that will thrive?
Well, I think that you need teams that have the capacity to change pace at any point and have the ability to adjust. I mean, we've seen this year the sort of shifting sands very fast, and as such, that there's the capability to change, but also the capability to stick to the path and know when you should do both. And I think great leadership teams have the ability to adjust on the run. I think that if you have too structured and dogmatic a leadership capability, it's much more difficult to do that. But that pace, I think, is becoming more important. And I think that the pressure on the leadership team with regard to themselves and their own balance, I think, is heightened at the moment, because the one consistency across Criticaleye, the time that they have available is so rare now. And so that in itself is putting some really interesting sort of challenges on leaders. And I think you have to be super clear on what your core priorities are and not get distracted and get pulled into things. I'm a massive believer at the moment that leaders should be getting out of things rather than getting into them. And I think a lot of leaders at the moment get sucked into the business at a point when actually you need to be much more external and really connected into the marketplace. So it's really important that you get the balance right.
Yeah, I mean, it's about knowing when to speed up and also knowing when to slow down, which is a difficult thing, right?
I think most leaders feel going slowly is not healthy, but there are times when it is. And if you take the real successes, they've often been through adversity. And I think if you look at businesses where they've gone through real trauma, and the fact is that none of them would have chosen to go through that process, but it creates an incredible energy and huge cultural opportunity. And actually, in some ways, I think one of the real challenges is businesses that aren't under that pressure. How do they harness that type of energy when they haven't got the burning platform? Is a real skill in terms of leadership and really difficult to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sangeeta, would you like to build on that maybe in terms of your experiences leading transformations in businesses?
So, in my experience, having that sense of urgency is so critical in transformation situations because they normally are urgent, whether you've got an enormous debt load or it's an existential moment for you, which it is for many media companies at the moment. I think that only having that sense of urgency within the team and within the whole company do you actually succeed in turning around a business, transforming a business, changing a business, getting a business to move at a fast pace in an aligned way. Having said that, you also need to ensure, and this is also very much the role of the board, that's all done within the context of longer term, bigger picture strategy, and it's not just short term tactical pace or urgency, but it's you keep the bigger picture in mind.
And Matthew, you've already touched on this to an extent, but how does both leadership and organisational resilience link with pace and the other areas that we've already discussed today?
I think it's absolutely inextricably linked. I mean, I think that if you look at the leadership teams that are really capable, they have deep resilience in them, and so as the pressure builds up, they have the capacity to cope and thrive. And I think that I think generally, if you look at environments where it is more difficult, the leaders who cope are the ones who actually enjoy a tougher environment, who have the capacity to have more direct conversations. I think if you're used to being a front runner and you're then in an environment where the wheels are coming off, I think it's extremely difficult. And that is absolutely key at the moment, is you have a capability to adjust, pivot, change to a really complex, difficult environment. And as such, that resilience has got to be baked into your business.
Absolutely. And I'd like to maybe ask for a final piece of advice from you both, particularly for the CEOs who'll be listening in, and really how they should be enabling their leadership teams to operate more effectively in order to go faster. And Sangeeta, I'll come to you first.
Use your board. Make them earn their fees. That's what they're there for. So don't just view the board as something you need to manage or a rubber stamping exercise. Really share your problems, make your problems their problems, and use their counsel. Ultimately, you need to decide the path forward, but use the people you have around the table to come to your decisions.
I think I agree with everything Sangeeta said, but one observation is that the better quality CEOs at the moment are the ones that are better connected in their organisation. And what do I mean by that? Probably less formal meetings, more informal meetings. They have better touch points through the organisation. They're very visible. And that visibility is something they drive into their leadership team, whether that's with their customer, whether that's internally, because I think that you can see change much quicker in that environment. And you'll seem to be standing with everyone and taking it forward. And I think driving that into your organisation and culturally, I think, is essential at the moment.
Yeah, a great point to finish on. So thank you, Sangeeta and Matthew, for sharing your insights on how leaders can cut through the uncertainty, move at speed, and deliver high performance. If you want to listen to any more episodes of our Inspiring Leaders series, you can find them on Podbean or Spotify. That's it for this one. Thank you again, and bye for now.
Thank you.